The billionaire secretly followed the maid's toddler. What he witnessed changed his life forever. "Mommy, the sad man is crying behind the roses again." Those were the 11 words that stopped Marcus Hale in his tracks. He froze behind the hedge, his $4,000 suit snagging on a thorn, his heart hammering like it hadn't in years. A 3-year-old girl had just called him the sad man. And she wasn't wrong. Before we get into this story, if you believe that sometimes the smallest people teach us the biggest lessons, type "I believe" in the comments below. Now, let's begin. Marcus Hale owned 4 companies, 2 private jets, and a house so large that an echo lived in it more permanently than he did. At 45, he had everything a man could want and nothing a man could need. His wife had died 6 years ago in a car accident on a rainy November night, and something in him had died with her. He didn't laugh anymore. He barely spoke unless it was about quarterly earnings or shipping contracts. His staff called him Mr. Hale in hushed voices, the way you'd talk about a ghost who still signed paychecks. 6 months ago, his housekeeper Rosa Delgado had asked, almost apologetically, if she could bring her daughter to work with her twice a week. Her usual sitter had fallen through, and Rosa, a widow herself, had no family nearby to help. Marcus had barely looked up from his laptop when he said, "Fine. Just keep her out of my office." He hadn't thought about it again. Not really. Not until the day he heard a small voice singing in the garden. Her name was Lily. She was 3 years old, with a mess of dark curls and a gap-toothed smile that seemed too big for her tiny face. She wore hand-me-down dresses that Rosa had carefully mended at the seams, and she carried a stuffed rabbit everywhere she went, one ear chewed ragged from years of love. Marcus had seen her maybe twice in passing, a blur of pink sneakers running across his marble foyer, and had felt nothing. He didn't have room left for anything. But today was different. Today, walking back from the West Wing after a call that left him drained, he heard something odd. A child's voice, talking softly, out by the rose garden his late wife Elena had planted with her own hands. Nobody went there anymore. He'd told the groundskeepers to maintain it but never to touch it, never to change a single stone on the path. It was the one place in the entire estate that still smelled like her. And there was Lily, sitting cross-legged in the dirt in her Sunday best dress, talking to the roses like old friends. "I know it's hard," she was saying, patting the soil gently, "but Mommy says you gotta water sad things too. Not just happy things." Marcus stood frozen behind the hedge, his breath caught somewhere between his throat and his chest. He watched as she pulled a small, dented watering can, clearly swiped from the garden shed, and carefully poured water over Elena's favorite rosebush, the pale pink one that never seemed to bloom anymore. "There," she whispered. "Now you won't feel so lonely." Something cracked in Marcus's chest. Not broke, cracked, the way ice cracks before it finally, mercifully, begins to melt. He didn't say anything. He couldn't. He turned and walked back inside, his hands trembling in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. That night, for the first time in 6 years, Marcus Hale didn't work past 9 o'clock. He sat in his study with a glass of scotch he never drank, staring at a photo of Elena on his desk, and he thought about a 3-year-old girl watering a dead man's grief like it was a living thing that could still grow. The next morning, he found himself doing something he never did. He asked Rosa what time Lily would be coming. "She won't be a bother, sir, I promise," Rosa said quickly, her eyes flashing with the particular fear of a single mother who knows how easily good things can be taken away. "I'll keep her in the staff quarters. She won't disturb your work." "That's not what I asked," Marcus said, quieter than he meant to. "I asked what time." Rosa blinked, confused, but answered. 10 o'clock, sir." He nodded and walked away before she could see whatever was happening on his face. He didn't understand it himself yet. If you had a childhood memory that still makes your heart ache with love, drop a heart in the comments. We're just getting started. That whole week, Marcus found reasons to walk past the garden at 10 in the morning. He told himself it was coincidence. He told himself he needed the exercise, needed air, needed to check on the roses for the gardener's sake. He was a man who had built an empire on telling convincing lies to boardrooms, and yet he couldn't even convince himself. On Thursday, he saw her again. This time she wasn't talking to the roses, she was trying, quite seriously, to climb into the old stone fountain that hadn't run water in years, her rabbit tucked under one arm like ballast. "Hey," Marcus said before he could stop himself, stepping out from behind the hedge for the first time. "That's a little dangerous, don't you think? Lily turned, startled, then looked at him with the frank, unguarded assessment only small children are capable of. Are you the sad man? Marcus felt his throat tighten. What did you say? Mommy says you're sad because your wife went to heaven, Lily said simply, climbing down off the fountain edge without any sense that she'd said anything remarkable. I water sad things. Do you want me to water you? Marcus Hale, CEO, Billionaire, a man who negotiated hostile takeovers without blinking, found himself kneeling down in the dirt in his tailored trousers so he could be at eye level with a 3-year-old girl holding a rusty watering can like a weapon of pure, uncomplicated love. Yeah, he said, his voice breaking on the single word. Yeah, I think I'd like that. She didn't hesitate. She tipped the can and poured a small trickle of water right over his shoulder, giggling as it soaked into his $2,000 shirt. There, she said, satisfied. Now you'll grow. Marcus laughed. Actually laughed, a real sound, rusty and unfamiliar, like a door that hadn't opened in years finally swinging free. He didn't know it yet, but that laugh was the first thread in something that would unravel everything he thought he knew about grief, about family, and about what it meant to be truly, achingly alive again. He had no idea that this small act of kindness from a 3-year-old girl would soon collide with a secret Rosa had been keeping, one that would change both of their lives forever. For the first time in 6 years, Marcus Hale found himself watching the clock, not for a board meeting, not for a stock report, but for 10 o'clock in the morning, when a 3-year-old with a rusty watering can would come out to the garden and pretend that roses and sad billionaires needed the same kind of care. He didn't tell anyone what had happened that day by the fountain. He didn't know how to explain it, even to himself. All he knew was that something in his chest that had been frozen solid for 6 years had shifted, just slightly, the way ice shifts before a thaw, quiet, almost imperceptible, but undeniable once it starts. He began finding small reasons to be near the garden. A phone call he could just as easily take indoors, taken instead on the terrace. A report he could read at his desk, read instead on a bench 20 feet from where Lily played. He told himself it was nothing. He was a busy man simply enjoying some fresh air. Rosa noticed, of course. Mothers notice everything. Sir, I'm so sorry if she's been a distraction, Rosa said one morning, appearing at the garden gate with the particular urgency of someone who had learned, the hard way, that good things can vanish fast when the wrong person decides you're inconvenient. I can keep her inside from now on, I don't want her bothering you. She's not bothering me, Marcus said, surprising himself with how quickly the words came. She's good company. Rosa blinked, clearly not expecting that answer. For a moment, something like relief passed over her tired face, and Marcus noticed, really noticed, maybe for the first time, the fine lines under her eyes, the kind that come not from age but from carrying too much, alone, for too long. Rosa, he said, before he could think better of it, how long has it just been you two? She hesitated. It wasn't the kind of question employers usually asked, and they both knew it. But something about the softness in his voice made her answer honestly. 3 years now. My husband, Manuel, he passed away before Lily was born. Heart problem, very sudden. I was 7 months pregnant. She said it plainly, the way people learn to say hard things after they've said them enough times that the words stop bleeding. It's been just us since. Marcus felt that crack in his chest widen a little further. He knew that particular kind of grief, the kind that doesn't announce itself, just moves in and rearranges all the furniture of your life without asking permission. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it more than he'd meant anything in a long time. We manage, Rosa said, straightening, the practiced brightness of someone who refuses pity sliding back into place. Lily is happy. That's what matters. If you know someone who carries the world quietly on their shoulders and never asks for help, tell us about them in the comments. This story is for them too. That afternoon, Marcus found himself standing outside his own study door, listening, not intentionally, he told himself, just happening to be walking by, as Rosa spoke quietly into her phone in the hallway. I know the appointment is important, but I just need until Friday, she was saying, her voice tight with a particular strain of someone doing math in their head that doesn't add up. I'll figure something out, I always do. Please, just, give me until Friday. Marcus stood frozen, his hand halfway to the door. He didn't know what appointment she meant, what she needed money for, or how bad things really were. But he knew that voice. He'd heard it in boardrooms from executives about to lose everything, dressed up in nicer suits but carrying the exact same fear. He didn't say anything. He wasn't ready yet to admit, even to himself, how much he'd started to care. But that evening, alone in his study, he opened his laptop and quietly transferred a sum of money into an anonymous scholarship fund earmarked, very specifically, for children of estate staff, a fund that, as far as anyone else would ever know, had existed for years. It had not. He created it that night, made sure Rosa's name would appear on the distribution list by morning, and closed the laptop feeling something unfamiliar settle in his chest. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't even really generosity, not in the way he was used to writing checks for tax purposes at galas he didn't want to attend. It felt like purpose. And he hadn't felt that in longer than he could remember. The next morning, Lily came bursting into the garden ahead of her mother, clutching her ragged rabbit and grinning her gap-toothed grin. "Sad man," she announced, as if this had become his official title. "Mommy's not sad today. She was crying happy tears this morning." Marcus knelt down, feeling that same rusty laugh trying to work its way loose again. "Is that so?" "Yep." Lily plopped down beside him in the dirt, entirely unbothered by the fact that she was ruining another dress. She said something good happened. "A miracle," she said. Marcus said nothing, just watched the little girl pick up her watering can and begin her daily rounds among the roses, humming some tuneless little song under her breath. He didn't take credit. He didn't need to. Watching her small, unguarded joy was payment enough. But as he sat there in the dirt in his tailored trousers, he didn't notice the figure watching from an upstairs window, his sister-in-law, Vivian Ashworth, arriving a day earlier than expected for her scheduled visit, her sharp eyes narrowing at the sight of Marcus Hale, laughing, in the garden, with the housekeeper's child. Vivian had spent 6 years carefully positioning herself as the stabilizing force in Marcus's grief-shattered life, the one who handled the foundation galas, who sat on the company's board on Elena's behalf, who had quietly begun suggesting to other board members that perhaps Marcus's isolation made him unfit to keep making major decisions alone. A softened, distracted, happy Marcus Hale was not part of her plans. She watched a moment longer, then turned from the window, already reaching for her phone. Something was going to have to be done about this. Vivian Ashworth did not knock. She never had, not since Elena's funeral, when she'd decided that grief gave her a permanent right of entry into Marcus's home and his affairs. She swept into his study wearing the particular smile of a woman who had already decided how a conversation would end before it began. "Marcus, you're looking, well," she said, in a tone that suggested this was not a compliment. "Better than well, actually. Almost cheerful. It's a bit unsettling, honestly, after all these years." Marcus didn't look up from his monitor. "Hello, Vivian. I saw you in the garden," she continued, settling into the chair across from his desk without being asked. "With the housekeeper's little girl. Very touching. Very, unlike you." "People change," Marcus said simply. "Do they?" Vivian's smile sharpened. "Or do they get managed, Marcus? Because I have to say, it's remarkable timing, a widow with a child suddenly showing up at just the moment you're vulnerable enough to fall for a sympathetic story. Have you ever wondered how convenient that is?" Marcus finally looked up, something cold entering his eyes that hadn't been there in years. Not the frozen coldness of grief, but something sharper, more alert. "Rosa has never asked me for anything. She didn't even know I was watching them in the garden." "Rosa," Vivian repeated, testing the name like it tasted wrong in her mouth. "You know her name. How sweet. She works in my house. Of course I know her name." "Marcus." Vivian leaned forward, her voice dropping into the register she used when she wanted to sound like she was protecting him instead of controlling him. "I loved my sister. I have spent 6 years making sure her legacy, this house, this company, the foundation she built, stayed intact while you disappeared into your grief. I'm not going to stand by and watch some housekeeper and her child walk in and undo everything, all because you're lonely enough to mistake basic kindness for something more." Marcus stood, and though he said nothing raised or dramatic, something in his posture made Vivian sit back slightly. "I think you should go," he said quietly. "And Vivian, Elena would have loved that little girl. You know that better than anyone." For just a flicker of a second, something like genuine hurt crossed Vivian's face, because he was right, and they both knew it. But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by the cool, calculating expression Marcus had learned, over years of board meetings, to recognize as dangerous. "We'll see," she said, and left without another word. If you've ever had someone try to convince you that your own happiness was suspicious, you already know exactly how this feels. Drop a pensive face if you understand. That evening, Marcus found himself walking out to the garden long after Lily and Rosa had gone home for the day, drawn there the way he'd been drawn to Elena's photo on his desk for 6 lonely years, except this time, the pool felt less like drowning and more like breathing. He sat on the old stone bench near the pale pink rose bush, Elena's favorite, the one that hadn't bloomed in years, and for the first time since her funeral, he spoke out loud to her. "I don't know what's happening to me," he admitted to the empty garden, his voice rough. "There's this little girl. She waters the roses like they're alive. Like I'm alive. And her mother." He stopped, shaking his head at himself. "You'd like her, Elle. You'd probably tell me to stop being an idiot and just talk to her properly instead of hiding behind hedges like a lunatic." The garden, of course, said nothing back. But as he sat there, his eyes drifted to the base of the rose bush, to a small weathered edge of something half buried in the soil that had never been there before, or that he had simply never noticed, in 6 years of walking past this spot with his eyes fixed firmly on the ground. He knelt down and brushed the dirt away, his heart suddenly pounding for reasons he didn't understand yet. It was a small metal box, rusted at the corners, clearly buried for years. His hands were shaking as he pried it open. Inside was a stack of letters, tied with a ribbon that had once been blue and was now faded to grey. And on top, in handwriting Marcus would have recognized anywhere, in a lifetime, in a heartbeat, in the very marrow of his bones. Handwriting he hadn't seen in 6 years except in old birthday cards he kept locked in a drawer he couldn't bear to open, was a single line. "For whoever waters my roses when I can't." And for Marcus, when he's finally ready to read this. It was Elena's handwriting. Marcus sat frozen in the dirt, the box trembling in his hands, the last golden light of evening fading over the garden his wife had planted with her own 2 hands 6 years before a car on a rain-slicked road had taken her from him without warning, without goodbye, without any chance for either of them to say the things that mattered. He hadn't been ready to read anything of hers in 6 years. He'd boxed up her clothes, sold nothing, changed nothing, and simply avoided every reminder like it might undo him completely if he looked too closely. But sitting there, with the memory of a 3-year-old's gap-toothed smile still warm in his chest, and a small rusted box of his dead wife's handwriting trembling in his hands, Marcus Hale finally, after 6 long years, felt ready. He untied the ribbon. The letter was dated 8 months before Elena died. Marcus's hands shook as he unfolded the paper, the creases soft with age, her looping handwriting as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. "My darling Marcus. If you're reading this, it means I've finally worked up the courage to bury it out here instead of leaving it in a drawer where you'd find it too soon and worry yourself sick over nothing. The doctors say I'm being cautious. I say I'm being honest. Either way, I wanted to write some things down while I still had the words for them." Marcus's breath caught. 8 months before the accident. He'd had no idea she'd been writing him letters. He hadn't known she'd been thinking about. He kept reading, his eyes blurring. "I've been having a recurring thought lately, and I can't shake it, so I'm going to write it down and let it be true on paper even if it never needs to be. If something ever happens to me, an accident, illness, whatever it might be, I don't want you to disappear into your grief the way I know you would. I know you, Marcus. You'd build walls around yourself so high that nobody could ever reach you again, and you'd call it strength, and it would actually be the loneliest thing in the world. So here's what I want, selfishly, from beyond whatever comes. I want you to keep tending this garden, even if it's just paying someone else to do it, because I want something of mine still growing when I'm not there to grow it myself. And I want you to let a child into your life again someday. Not to replace the ones we never had time to have, but because children see straight through grief in a way adults have forgotten how to. They water sad things without even knowing they're doing it. Let them water you, Marcus. Let someone in. I love you. I have loved you since the day you spilled coffee on my dissertation and apologized by buying me a coffee cart, out of spite, I think, so you'd never have to apologize again. I will love you long after I'm gone, in every rose in this garden, in every quiet morning, in every chance you give yourself to be happy again. Don't you dare waste it. Elena." Marcus sat in the dirt of his wife's garden, the letter trembling in his hands, and for the first time since the funeral, he wept, Not the tight, controlled grief he'd allowed himself in private moments over the years, but something enormous and unguarded, 6 years of frozen sorrow breaking loose all at once. He didn't know how long he sat there. Long enough that the sky went from gold to violet to the deep blue of full evening, the first stars pricking through overhead, the garden around him rustling softly in the breeze like it, too, was breathing out something it had held too long. When he finally looked down at the box again, he realized there was a second letter beneath the first, shorter, and in a different hand entirely. His stomach dropped as he recognized it. Rosa's handwriting. He'd seen it 100 times on grocery lists left on the kitchen counter. Mrs. Hale. I don't know if you'll ever read this, or if this is silly, writing a letter to someone in your dreams. But I promised myself I'd write it anyway. You saved my life 2 years ago, not in some big dramatic way, but in the way that matters. You found me crying in the hospital parking lot after Manuel's funeral, 7 months pregnant and terrified, and you didn't know me from anyone, but you sat with me for an hour and told me things would be okay, and you gave me your number just in case. I never had the courage to use it until I saw the job posting for your husband's estate, and I recognized the address. I applied because some part of me hoped it would bring me closer to whatever kindness you'd shown me that day. I never got to thank you properly. I hope, wherever you are, you know it changed everything for me and my daughter. Rosa. Marcus sat in stunned, breathless silence, staring at both letters, understanding crashing over him in waves. Rosa hadn't just stumbled into his life by chance. Elena had touched her life once, briefly, unknowingly setting in motion a chain of events that would, years later, bring her daughter into this very garden to water roses and, without ever meaning to, water him too. It wasn't manipulation, the way Vivian had suggested. It was something far stranger and more beautiful. The quiet, invisible thread of one woman's kindness reaching forward through grief and time to hand her husband exactly what she'd asked for in a letter she never got to send. Marcus carefully folded both letters, placed them back in the box, and pressed his palm flat against the cool earth of the rose bed, right where Lily had knelt just days before with her rusty watering can. "Okay, Elle," he whispered into the darkening garden. "I hear you." Marcus didn't sleep that night. He sat with the letters spread across his desk until dawn broke pale gold through the study windows, and by the time the household began to stir, he had made a decision that felt less like a choice and more like something that had already been decided for him, 6 years ago, by a woman he'd never stopped loving. He wanted to tell Rosa what he'd found. He wanted to thank her, to ask her about that day in the parking lot, to finally understand the strange, quiet grace that had brought Lily into his garden at exactly the moment he needed her most. But Vivian moved first. She arrived at the estate before 9, this time with a folder tucked under her arm and 2 members of the estate's legal team trailing uncomfortably behind her. Marcus found them assembled in his own dining room when he came down for coffee, and something in his stomach went cold at the sight of Rosa standing at the far end of the table, her face pale, her hands twisted tightly in her apron. "What is this?" Marcus asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Housekeeping," Vivian said pleasantly, sliding the folder across the table. Turns out there were some irregularities in Ms. Delgado's employment application. Falsified references, apparently. And there's a rather concerning pattern of financial requests routed through the staff scholarship fund, which, I might add, nobody on the board authorized. Marcus's jaw tightened. "I authorized it." "Did you?" Vivian's eyebrows rose in exaggerated surprise. "Because it certainly looks, on paper, like a housekeeper manufactured a sympathetic backstory, ingratiated her child with a grieving, isolated employer, and then quietly redirected funds into her own accounts. I'm not accusing anyone of anything, Marcus. I'm simply doing my due diligence as a member of this board before things go any further." Rosa's face had gone from pale to ashen. "I never asked for that money. I didn't even know where it came from until yesterday morning, I swear to you." "Of course you'll say that," Vivian said smoothly. "That's enough." Marcus's voice cut through the room like a blade, sharper than either woman had ever heard it. "Rosa didn't ask for anything. I set up that fund myself, without telling her, because I found out she was struggling and I didn't know how else to help without it feeling like charity. That was my decision, made with my money, and it is nobody's business but mine." Vivian's composure flickered, just slightly. "Marcus, be reasonable. You've known this woman for what, 6 months? And suddenly you're defending her like..." "Like what?" Vivian. Marcus's eyes were hard. Like someone who's earned it. Because she has. Every single day, in ways you've never bothered to notice because you've been too busy deciding what's best for a life that isn't yours to manage. The room fell into a thick, uncomfortable silence. One of the lawyers cleared his throat and began quietly gathering the folder, sensing, correctly, that whatever this meeting had been designed to accomplish had already failed. But the damage, in its own quiet way, had already been done. That night, after Vivian and her lawyers had left and the house had settled into its usual heavy silence, Marcus went looking for Rosa and found her in the small staff apartment on the estate grounds. A suitcase already half-packed on the bed, Lily asleep in a nest of blankets on the couch, her rabbit clutched tight against her chest. "Rosa." "I have to go," Rosa said, not looking up from her folding, her voice tight and controlled in the way of someone barely holding herself together. "I won't put Lily through this. I won't have people questioning whether I'm some kind of schemer, targeting a grieving man for his money. I have some pride left, Mr. Hale, even if I don't have much else. Rosa, please, look at me." She finally did, and Marcus saw, for the first time, the full weight of exhaustion she carried. Not just from 3 years of raising a child alone, but from a lifetime of people assuming the worst about a widow who'd simply been trying to survive. "I've spent 3 years being careful," Rosa said, her voice cracking. "Careful with money, careful with my reputation, careful never to give anyone a reason to say I was taking advantage. And in one afternoon, that woman made it sound like I orchestrated all of this. Like my daughter's love for a lonely man's garden was some kind of strategy." A tear finally slipped free, and she wiped it away, angry at herself for it. "I can't stay somewhere I'm not trusted." "You have my trust," Marcus said quietly. "Completely. Without question." "For how long?" Rosa asked, and it wasn't an accusation, it was exhaustion, plain and simple. "Until the next relative decides I'm inconvenient. I have a daughter to protect, Mr. Hale. I can't gamble her stability on how long your patience with your family lasts." Marcus had no answer for that. Not yet. He watched her zip the suitcase closed, watched her gently gather her sleeping daughter into her arms, and he stood frozen in the doorway of that small apartment, understanding with sudden, terrible clarity that he was about to lose the first real thing he'd felt in 6 years, and he didn't know, yet, how to stop it. Marcus didn't sleep again that night either. He sat in his study with Elena's letter open in front of him, rereading the same line over and over until the words practically burned into him. Let someone in. He'd let someone in. And now, because of his own family, because of 6 years of grief that had left him too slow, too hesitant, too careful, he was about to watch her walk out the door. At 6 in the morning, he called Vivian. "I know it's early," he said, before she could speak, "but I need you to understand something, and I need you to understand it clearly. Whatever you think you're protecting, the company, Elena's legacy, my dignity, you're not protecting anything. You're destroying the first good thing that's happened to me since she died, and I won't forgive it. If you ever try something like yesterday again, you will be removed from the board. Not asked to step down. Removed. Do you understand me?" There was a long pause on the other end. "Marcus, I only ever wanted." "I know what you wanted," Marcus said, quieter now, some of the anger draining into something more tired and more honest. "You wanted to keep me exactly as I was, because a grieving, isolated Marcus was easier to manage than a happy one. But Elena wrote me a letter 8 months before she died, Vivian. She told me to let someone in. She wanted this for me. And I am done apologizing for finally listening to her." He hung up before Vivian could respond, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel guilty about it. By 7, he was standing outside the small gatehouse near the estate's main road, where he knew Rosa would have to pass with her car packed, on her way into town to find a cheap motel until she figured out her next move. He'd asked the groundskeeper the night before, quietly, to let him know if she left early. He wasn't going to let her leave without a fight. Her car came around the bend just after 7:15, and Marcus stepped out into the road, raising a hand. Rosa stopped, rolling down her window with visible reluctance. Lily was buckled in the back seat, her rabbit pressed to the window glass, waving its ragged ear at him like a small, sleepy farewell. "Please," Marcus said, his voice raw. "Give me 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Rosa's jaw tightened, but she put the car in park. Marcus walked to her window, and for a long moment, He just stood there, trying to find words big enough for what he needed to say. "I found letters," he finally said. "In the garden. Buried near the pink roses. One from Elena, written 8 months before the accident, telling me to let a child into my life again, to let someone in. And another one," his voice broke slightly, "from you. To her. About the day in the hospital parking lot." Rosa's face went white. "How did you?" "You wrote her a letter she never got to read," Marcus said gently. "And somehow, impossibly, it still found its way back to both of us. Rosa, you didn't scheme your way into my life. Elena led you here, years before either of us understood why. And I am not going to let my dead wife's last gift to me walk out of my life because my sister-in-law is scared of losing her grip on my grief." Tears were streaming down Rosa's face now, unguarded. "I was so scared," she admitted. "Scared people would think the worst of me. Scared of losing this job, this home for Lily, but mostly," she stopped, shaking her head. "Mostly what?" "Mostly scared of how much I'd started to care about you," she whispered. "Both of you. This whole broken, beautiful family we somehow started building without ever meaning to." Marcus reached through the open window and gently took her hand. "Then don't leave. Not because of a job. Stay because Lily Waters sad things back to life, and because her mother did the exact same thing for me, one conversation at a time, without even trying. Stay because I know, Elena would want this. All of it." From the back seat, a small, sleepy voice piped up. "Are we staying, Mommy?" Rosa let out a laugh that was half sob, wiping her face with her free hand. "I think we might be, baby." Marcus opened the car door, and as Rosa stepped out into the cool morning air, he pulled her, carefully, questioningly, giving her every chance to step back, into an embrace that felt, for the first time in 6 years, like coming home. Behind them, Lily unbuckled herself with the fierce independence of toddlers everywhere and toddled over, wrapping her small arms around both their legs, her rabbit squished between them. "Group hug," she announced solemnly, as if this settled everything. It did. 6 months later, the pale pink rose bush by the old stone bench bloomed for the first time in 6 years. Marcus stood in the garden early one Saturday morning, coffee in hand, watching Lily, now 3.5, and considerably more skilled with a watering can than she'd been the day she first called him the sad man, carefully tend to each and every flower with the same fierce devotion she brought to everything in her small, fearless life. "They're happy now," she informed him with great authority, patting the soil the way she always did. "You watered them enough." "I had help," Marcus said, smiling, and it came easily now, the way it hadn't in years, no longer a rusty, unfamiliar thing but simply part of who he was again. Rosa appeared on the terrace steps a moment later, 2 mugs of coffee in hand, wearing not a housekeeper's uniform but a simple sundress, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. She wasn't Marcus Hale's employee anymore. 2 months after that morning on the Gatehouse Road, he had asked her, with more nervousness than he'd shown in any boardroom in 20 years, if she would consider being something else entirely. She'd said yes before he even finished the sentence. They weren't married yet. Rosa had gently insisted on taking things slow, for Lily's sake as much as her own, and Marcus, who had learned patience the hard way, hadn't argued. But there was a ring waiting in his study desk drawer, and there was a wedding date circled quietly on both their calendars for the following spring, and there was, most importantly, a little girl who now called this enormous, once echoing house simply home. Vivian had resigned from the board 3 months earlier, her position quietly, permanently filled by someone with considerably less interest in managing Marcus's grief for their own benefit. She sent a card at Christmas. Marcus hadn't decided yet whether he'd write back, but he no longer felt the cold fury that used to accompany her name. Grief, he'd learned, had a way of teaching you which battles were worth carrying and which ones you could finally, mercifully, set down. "Penny for your thoughts?" Rosa asked, settling onto the bench beside him, handing him his coffee. "I was just thinking about something Elena wrote," Marcus said quietly. "She said children see straight through grief, water sad things without even knowing they're doing it. I used to think that was just a nice sentiment. Now I think it might be the truest thing anyone's ever told me." Rosa leaned her head against his shoulder, watching Lily hum her tuneless little song as she made her rounds among the roses, utterly unaware that she'd rewritten the entire trajectory of 2 grown adults' broken lives with nothing more than a rusty watering can and an unguarded, 3-year-old heart. "You know," Rosa said softly, "I think about that day in the parking lot all the time. I was so lost. I didn't think I'd ever feel steady again. And Elena just sat with me, this total stranger, and made me believe things could be okay. She paused. I think she'd be happy, knowing it came back around like this. I think so too, Marcus said, and for once, the thought of Elena didn't bring the old, familiar ache. It brought something warmer instead, gratitude, and a strange, quiet peace, like a debt finally repaid, a circle finally closed. Grief doesn't end because time passes. It ends, or rather, it transforms, when we let ourselves be brave enough to feel joy again, even when it seems impossible, even when it seems disloyal to everything we've lost. Sometimes healing doesn't come from grand gestures or perfect plans. Sometimes it comes from the smallest, most unguarded acts of love, a child with a rusty watering can, a stranger's kindness in a hospital parking lot, a letter buried and waiting years to be found. We are never as alone in our healing as we think. Sometimes the people who are meant to carry us forward have already been placed in our path, quietly, patiently, waiting for us to finally be ready to let them in. If this story touched your heart even a little, we'd be so grateful if you'd like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling us which part moved you the most. Stories like Marcus, Rosa, and Lily's are why we do what we do, and we've got so many more heartwarming, emotional stories coming your way. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.